Teach me about the Great Lakes. Teach me about the Great Lakes. Welcome back to Teach Me About the Great Lakes, a twice monthly, usually, podcast in which I, a Great Lakes novice, get people who are smarter and harder working than I am to teach me all about the Great Lakes. My name is Stuart Carlton, and I work with Illinois Indiana Sea Grant at Purdue University. And I'm joined today by Carolyn Foley. How are you doing today, Carolyn?
Honestly, Stuart, I'm a tiny bit cold, but generally doing well, thanks. How are you?
I am also good. I'm not that cold right now. My feet are cold, actually. But I think that's just because I have no socks on. And I should have socks. All right, so life advice here, wear socks. Anyway, no, I'm really excited this week, Carolyn, because I think we're going to have a fascinating conversation with a couple of researchers from the University of Windsor, actually.
Yes, the University of Windsor is a fabulous place in southwestern Ontario. Looking forward to having a conversation about how they're working in their lab to kind of maybe think a little bit differently about how to do science.
Yeah, no, this is really cool. So we're going to speak with, her name is Dr. Carolyn and someone else from her lab, Chitty. And to me, the work they're doing in terms of traditional and local ecological knowledge and partnering with Indigenous peoples is really both exciting and fascinating and inspirational. And so I'm excited to have this conversation. But first, I would like to point out that Dr. Febria is a researcher, which means it is time for the coveted researcher feature theme. Researcher feature, a feature in which a researcher gonna teach us about the Great Lakes. Our guests today are Dr. Carolyn Febria and Chitty from the University of Windsor. Dr. Febria is the Canada Research Chair in Freshwater Restoration Ecology and Assistant Professor. She's also the Director of the Healthy Headwaters Lab and the Co-Director of the Organic Analysis and Nutrient Lab. Chitty is the Research Partnership Coordinator and Field Guide and also the Indigenous Partnership Coordinator for Fishcast at the Healthy Headwaters Lab, and all of this is within the Great Lakes Institute for Environmental Research at the University of Windsor. Carolyn and Chitty, how are y'all today?
I'm great. Thanks for inviting us to be here.
I'm good, thanks.
Good. We are excited to have you. Okay, so the whole concept of this is not this podcast is totally true. I'm completely ignorant when it comes to so many Great Lakes things, and so I'm going to start.
That's very true.
Yes, it's no joke. People think I'm being modest. I'm not. Anyway, but so your group is called the Healthy Headwaters Lab. Okay, so I can roughly figure out what that is. What a headwater is. That's like the source, I think, of a stream or something. But what is a headwater, and what do y'all do with those?
Yeah, so the headwaters are essentially the source of our streams and rivers, wetlands, and Great Lakes. It's where water runs off the landscape or from groundwater and comes up to the land and joins larger rivers downstream. These are small streams and rivers, creeks, that we call locally. These are the places where a lot of us interact with water, and they're also the types of water bodies that end up getting either bulldozed or buried, destroyed, or culverted. For every one large river, there's hundreds to thousands of these sort of headwater tributary streams. And so our work just wants to continue to do work to quantify them, understand them, and really just amplify research in those small waterways for the benefit of, restoration and conservation.
And when you're talking about headwaters that feed into the Great Lakes, I mean, how far in the Great Lakes region, how far inland in like southern Ontario or throughout the Midwestern states or stuff like that, how far do they reach?
They reach to the very tips and the edges of our drainage basins. These are, mostly they've been farmed over or they've been buried in urban places. They've been deforested. But, if you look at a Google Earth map, you can almost see a lot of those paleo channels or those historical channels that once used to, where water used to gather and move downstream. So they're everywhere if you look.
So the water would gather, so paleo channels, that means like the sort of
historic,
ancient...
historic streams that used to be there. Agriculture development would bury them over and create new drains or streams.
Okay, so it would be like the source would be underground or maybe just a place where a lot of rain or snow melt or whatever gathered. And then over time, as people develop the area, either for ag or maybe for, I don't know, shopping malls, not that those are a thing anymore. For kids out there, that's what we used to call the internet. And so they, and so after covering them up, like the water just the streams, did they like rechannelize or just kind of dry up? What happens to those?
Yeah, so I mean, these small headwater streams are dynamic. They go between being wet and being dry, and we call these hydro periods. So this is a normal component of our ecosystem. When it rains, it runs off the landscape into lower elevations, and when they're wet enough and long enough to hold water, you see these channels form. Sometimes it's fed by groundwater, and groundwater might come to the surface, and together that, forms a stream channel. So, maybe part of the year, a majority of the year, they might be dry. So that might leave, people who are wanting to, if you wanted to farm that landscape or build on that landscape, you might think that it doesn't flow and therefore it doesn't exist. But that's where land and water and people meet. It's these headwater places and spaces.
And so what kind of research do you do there? You talked about it a little bit, but I mean, so it's primarily biophysical research.
Yeah.
Is it looking at how these have changed as a result of the anthropogenic influence or what?
Yeah, so I'm an ecologist by training, a freshwater ecologist by training, and it's been over a decade now, but my PhD work was on small headwater streams in the Speed River catchment, which is, runs through the city of Guelph and here in southern Ontario. And my work really started with understanding the connection of all of those things, like how does the presence and absence of water interact with the stream bed, which we call the hypereic zone, and how does that influence the transport of nutrients, especially carbon, and the microbial communities that we rely on to do things like, retain nutrients or cycle nutrients, and ultimately that has an influence on the invertebrates and the fish that inhabit these spaces. So it really is an ecologist perspective, thinking about how all of these are connected. So that's the lens I bring to it. So the research we do is to understand, especially because with more and more human impacts, looking at these places as spaces for restoration and conservation is really important. And so in the last decade, I've really brought and tried to center the social part of the ecology we do in alignment with the science that we do, or the natural science that we do.
Right, and you said so. The space where you are conducting your research is the place where I forget how you said it. It was where water and land
water, and people meet. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So who are the people that you are working with mostly?
Sure.
Like what types of groups are you guys connecting with?
So currently in the Great Lakes, a lot of the communities we interact with are local and Indigenous knowledge holders. So the farming community is really big in southwestern Ontario and in our pocket of Essex County where Windsor is situated. And then ultimately, also, as in a Canadian institution and as an immigrant settler myself, I completely recognize and honor the fact that there have been people that called this place home and have those rights and are traditional knowledge holders and rights holders for this area. So there's so much knowledge and I guess responsibility to honoring that I also really center local communities in the work that I do. So in one sense, settler farmer communities are the ones that are doing a lot of the farming locally, but equally, this is the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy. And so I also begin there.
That's interesting. So that's a focus that you don't necessarily hear a lot of. There's a lot of people who work with traditional ecological knowledge and local ecological knowledge or whatever, but it seems like your group really goes out of their way to explicitly incorporate that. And can you give me examples of like how has that influenced your science, do you think?
Well, I guess, for the past 5 years before, our lab just really became and joined the University of Windsor last year. But for the 5 years previous to that, I worked with farming communities and local Maori communities in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So I was doing a lot of working on headwater streams, doing restoration, trying to develop actionable science to inform, farmers and communities in general. So that thread of, working with local practitioners on the ground is, completely consistent with restoration and what we need in restoration. And I think when you look at examples around the world and here in Canada of where we've actually, done a good job of restoring streams and river ecosystems, those examples are ones where partnerships between scientists and local Indigenous communities are maximized. So I guess if you just look at the evidence, there's a scientific evidence showing that if you start from the beginning, if you really maximize and benefit and really partner and center partnerships in their science, it's more impactful. So there's that one element. And then for me, it's normal. It's just a value that I really hold dear and prioritize through all of the funding and the partnerships that I bring. So it wasn't like we're out to do something different. I think it's just from all ways of dimensions of looking at the problem and wanting to restore fresh water for future generations. Partnering just makes an obvious first step, an important step before we do the science.
But you, so you talk about partner, but actually y'all seem to go a few steps farther. And within your lab group, and I recommend everybody we'll link to it in the show notes. You should go to Catherine's webpage and look at the really diverse and large lab group that she oversees. In fact, I'd love to talk about how you do that successfully.
How do we actually do it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I'm happy to talk about that. I think I spent the first year really listening, spending a lot of time meeting with the farming community, meeting with our Indigenous community, partnering with people, that I was immediately welcomed by like knowledge holders and elders in the community. The person who directs the Indigenous Allyship program, her name's Candy Donaldson. She guided me and helped just situate me to the social landscape and the relationship building that I was hoping would happen. Sure. And I think when I started that I just wanted to make a commitment as a scientist to start with the relationships first and understand that context before coming in and proposing the best possible hypothesis. I think if I didn't do that job right, then like our science would be less impactful and fail. And so I took the time, we were a small team then, it was me and Candy and Jess a year ago. We took the time to just listen and meet farmers and just, meet with, go to Walpole and listen and really try or do our best job to understand, in what way could a group, a science team that looks at headwater systems, wanting to connect land, water, and, and from an ecological lens, in what way are those skills useful? And so that comes from, just a lot of mentorship and thinking about what makes truly impactful science. And one of the ways that I could do that was to actually fund positions for Indigenous scientists to be in our team, to fund farmers to be part of our team, and just really think about the social infrastructure that needed to be in place so that I, as a scientist, could play that role, but it was in step and aligned with what the local communities were needing in terms of a science and community. And so I think in that process, we realized it was important to have a communicator, so we have a lab storyteller. We have, we've pursued strategic grants that allowed us to align research grants from my lab with, a grant that's led by our Indigenous scholar, Clint Jacobs, that allowed us to hire Kat, that created positions, really just aligning opportunities so that we could all work together. So it was really strategic. And it seems like it's come together. Like, I know it's been a year, but I think that we did spend a lot of time trying to get that infrastructure right and the intention right and be very clear about what we value and how we roll. And that led to these opportunities.
Katrina, what's your background in your training and expertise?
So I'm a Anishinaabe from Neshiniming, which is up on the Bruce Peninsula, and I had been working with Parks Canada for almost 10 years doing ecological monitoring and some fisheries work. And I saw this job ad for a field guide working with Walpole Island First Nation and the Healthy Headwaters Lab. And Walpole is just this amazing environment, completely made up of wetlands and islands. So I really wanted a change of scenery. And so I took the job interview almost exactly a year ago and met Catherine and Candy. And it was just, it was obvious from the very beginning that it was just a different way of recruiting and a different value system. And so I joined the team in January, and my main role was to be working on one of our grants. It's a Canada Nature Fund for Aquatic Species at Risk in partnership with Walpole. And since then, it's kind of bloomed into this position with many hats and many roles. But our closest partner that we work with is Walpole Island, and my role is to try and identify ways that we can work together and really listen to their concerns and their priorities as a community for doing environmental research and building capacity within their own community to address those issues. So I was really fortunate that both Kat and Candy had developed this relationship that I was able to join in on. And yeah, they really invested the time and the energy to become not only partners and allies, but friends with a lot of people at Walpole. And I think we've really benefited from that. So
sorry, for the benefit of Stuart and our listeners, can you please
this was going to be my question. Yes.
You're welcome. So can you please situate, tell people, so the Bruce Peninsula, it juts out into yeah, everyone who's listening to this should go and look at pictures of the Bruce Peninsula. It's one of the most magical places on earth. So can you let people know where Walpole Island is, please?
So Walpole Island is at the northern tip of the St. Clair River, just along the Detroit River, about 2 hours northeast of Windsor.
Okay. Cool.
And so you're doing a lot of work with the communities there. Is it an indigenous area, or who lives there? Why do we care about it?
Why do we care? Yeah, no, that's, if you look at a map, what I love when I hear people like Dean Jacobs and Clint Jacobs talk about Walpole Island, they say it's in the heart of the Great Lakes. So it literally is like heart, that heart-shaped spot in the Great Lakes. And there's there's a delta. That's Walpole Island. So there's also a ferry that goes to Michigan from that area. It covers the traditional territory where the university is situated on. So we have, Dr. Dean Jacobs, who heads the Heritage Center there and works with Clint, who's our Indigenous scholar. They had a relationship with the university to begin with. And that's when I talk about, when I landed here back in Windsor after years abroad, it was Candy who has been leading an effort to indigenize the science curriculum and she sits on Senate for the Aboriginal Education Council at the university. So there were these relationships that the university was trying to make and had established. And, I was welcomed into that network. And then really it was a process of continuing to think about and create opportunities together. So it was a real strategic partnership between, Candy bringing us in, connecting us with Clint. And, one of the immediate things we wanted to do is offer a course that was at Walpole, get students outside of the university and learn from the land. And so there was a traditional ecological knowledge field course. You can find it on our lab website. It's on YouTube. One of the students produced a video about a short video about that experience. And it was our way to really kind of bring the experience of learning about traditional ecological knowledge from those traditional ecological knowledge holders. And then we also had, faculty come and teach us how to learn how to use a drone or do biomonitoring, but it was very place-based and it was and every time we did a Western science thing, we'd have an elder that came and talked to us. So I think, we are so lucky, first of all, to have even recruited someone like Katrina, because she's obviously a badass. She does so amazing things. And the reason why she can wear so many hats is because she's just so talented. And I think we were really pinching ourselves that, if we were, we had this hope that if we could have an authentic partnership, have really clear values, really be clear about the science that we were wanting to do and the partnerships we wanted to build, that we could attract, some amazing leaders. And, so Katrina is just one of those examples. And in that same vein, if we could pursue grants where someone from so none of us are actually from Walpole Island, which I think is amazing, that this relationship, you don't have to be from that community or Indigenous to do this well or do this right, but be open to learning and building that and investing in building those relationships. So in our team, some of our team are from Walpole and sit in the Heritage Center or work from home virtually at Walpole, and some come to the university. And that's been very much, our way of trying to build a bridge between our team and the community.
mean, what you're describing, Catherine, and you may not phrase it this way, but you're this is like a radical reimagining of how to do ecological science, isn't it? I mean, you have a storyteller. Yeah. And I think that's really, frankly, inspiring. And if somebody is inspired by this, as you should be, and what are there some baby steps that people might take to try to integrate better or be a better ally to Indigenous peoples in their area, or incorporate it into their science if they're a scientist or whatever? Do you have some sort of baby steps that folks might take?
If I can tag something on to sorry, I'm reading your name. You can edit that out. Okay, so we have a joke that we call Stuart. People will say like, "Hi, Carlton," or "Hi, Carlson," or things like that. And I'm looking at his
totally
email,
did it.
Carlton as. So I was like, "Oh, hey, Carlton." So yeah. So happy U.S. Thanksgiving. So yeah. Sorry, you're gonna have to edit this. Sorry. Alrighty. So if I could just piggyback on Stuart's question, it sounds like you have a lot of support at the University of Windsor to pursue these types of partnerships, allyships. So when you're talking about the baby steps, if you could give them for people who, even if they don't have that level of support, are there any kind of baby steps you could suggest?
Well, we have that conversation all the time because we didn't know what to call what we were doing. Is this allyship? What is allyship? So I think, on our lab website, we actually have a page called the Indigenous Allyship Program. And there are some resources that we've accessed, and we are continually sharing resources amongst us to just kind of, again, revisit what is it that we're doing? What is our intention? So that's a first step. There's lots of resources out there. We've put a few on our website. And so that's one way as an individual that we can start to grow and learn. We also talk about, having people as a first start. There's lots of resources out there, including understanding whose land are you on. So there are websites, I think Native Land is one of them that we direct people to figure out if you just want to know what treaties, are, that apply to the places that there's lots of little things like that we as individuals can do. And then I think as I've continued to, navigate the science space, I've had incredible mentors that have showed me what an allyship looks like in action. And so some of it is, the allyship program, I basically got support from the Faculty of Science in the university when I proposed to them. Like, I know they get things like overheads and fees. I also know that the university signs on to these, a dimensions charter for equity, diversity, and inclusion, and have these commitments. And I basically asked them to, that I had this vision and redirect those fees towards this program that can allow us to hire and recruit and retain individuals. So in a way, like they basically put their money where their mouth is. I basically ask them, what kind of commitments are you making towards reconciliation of our Indigenous community here in Canada? And here's an idea in science. What we could do is create a program that actually centers that and, allows us to make and foster the space for our Indigenous partners and scientists to lead. And so that's kind of one example that me as a PI that I've decided to do. And and that also equally that applies to working with local farming communities. I'm doing research on their land that they are, these settler communities are farming, and there's lots of drains that are managed by various superintendents and things like that. And so I decided again to reinvest things like overheads and fees towards hiring a farmer. So I think it's not just about working with only one community, and that's what we do. I think we're just very serious about our mission, which is to advance science that will connect land, water, and people, that will, ensure freshwater and farming sustainability for future generations. And I know that science is one dimension of, advancing that and achieving that. But, especially in other research teams or mentors and other examples that I have been really either just impressed by or inspired by, seeing real commitments to other types of knowledge being there. It's not just numbers, but stories are a major form of data and knowledge that's transferred across generations. So that obviously means we needed a specialist in storytelling, which is why we have a lab storyteller. And so those are examples. Hopefully that answers your question.
I was really apprehensive about the title Indigenous Allyship Program when I joined, because it's, that carries a lot of weight to it, and it's contentious depending on who you're speaking to. And so I really was conscious of whether we were doing things that lived up to that. And I think the biggest commitment that I've seen over my time at the lab is time. Like time and trust, I think, are the most foundational building blocks of that. And I think you lose that a lot with research partnerships, because there's strict timelines and there's outputs that are, required, and sometimes communities, First Nation communities, are notified right before, and then you go in, you do the work, and you create a report, and that's extractive, and it doesn't necessarily leave the community with any benefits. And so I've noticed just how much time we've set aside to, eat together. We have lunches when possible. Before COVID, we had an open house, and the labs went to the community a number of times to join in different events. And I think those have really led to the relationship that's been formed, and has resulted in us having more and more opportunities to partner together on grants that benefit both the lab and the community. And as Catherine said, you create positions and redirect these funds so that's allyship. It's using your position and your influence to influence change, influence positive change, and overcome these barriers. So I've definitely seen really good examples of that.
Is the funding, do you guys mostly get funding through Canadian sources, like through NSERC and things like that? Because I know, I guess I don't know if anyone from NSF listens to our humble podcast, but hey, NSF! I think there are a lot of different funding organizations that are talking about ways that they can do things. And I think there's some really creative ways that you just
mentioned. We have lots of funding. Yeah, I guess, a lot of our programmatic funding comes from the Tri-Council funding, but our Nature Fund is like a federal science program. So it's administered through the Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and a specific call around species at risk. We've received numerous small teaching grants and undergraduate grants that create the position of the lab storyteller, and that created the resources for our traditional ecological knowledge course. So we have a diversity of funding schemes and sources that we draw from. And I also, I still continue to have, research connections in Aotearoa and New Zealand. And there's a whole science agency called the Biological Heritage National Science Challenge. And they have really done a lot of work around, refunding and redirecting science funds. So it's impactful. You can still do blue sky science, but you can still build relationships. If someone's going to be doing research on a species at risk, why not work with the local community to bring the wood that's of interest or the fungus that you're trying to do research on? So I've just sort of seen how if you reorganize, funding, and have these just different sources, it's possible. It's just a matter of, I think there are examples out there, and I'm happy to point people towards those examples. It's not just us. Yeah.
So one thing, it was interesting, Katrina, when you were talking, you talked about allyship as like a potentially controversial term, but you meant that it was overstating what you're doing, that, allyship is a really high bar. But I was thinking it's probably controversial on the other end as well, right, Catherine? Like, you have to get some blowback from hardcore scientists, about the work that you're doing. Do you find that people tend to push back against it and say, either against TE or traditional ecological knowledge, or against, the fact that this, I don't know, it approaches some definition of advocacy that people might not be comfortable with? Do you hear anything along those lines, or is everybody as inspired and fired up as I am?
Well, no one's saying it to my face, and if they did, I don't really care, because I think the evidence is really clear when it comes to restoration that ecological science has to be informed by social dimensions as well. So I think for people who are really serious about sustainability, there's always a social dimension, and I'm constantly reminded. And so my circle is not just a science circle. Thankfully, I have colleagues who are social scientists and economists or practitioners on the ground, and those are, that diversity, those are the people who, in the communities who are actually stewards of the land, who are, I think the evidence is there. It's going to take generations for the kinds of restoration that this planet needs. And if we don't partner with our local, stewards of the land and water, I mean, that's the timescale we need to work at. And so that's kind of the impact that I'm thinking about, and not necessarily the peer-reviewed science. I think, again, the evidence also shows that that's kind of biased. There are paywalls and barriers to accessing that science, and there's a huge need to actually translate that science into practice. I mean, that bridge and that connectivity, I think we talk a lot about in our group. we don't advocate for anything we don't have evidence for. We're not advocating for, I think the role that we play is really like that honest broker of science. Like we understand the role of partnerships and the role of incorporating social dimensions in the science that we do. But, we're not, if you look at our comms and what we do and the stories we tell, it isn't advocating for things. It really is about telling those stories. If we do have data and science to show, there's a page for that. But I think, for people that really take a minute to think about what we're doing and look at the evidence, the impact, it is more than just the peer reviewed paper, but actions on the ground, community relationships, funding that's directed towards that kind of capacity building. So it's a really multidimensional, I guess, portfolio of evidence that we think about, because we're really serious about holistic and actual change.
Yeah, I'm not sure if other labs are talking about the way we do things, but one of the things that impressed me the most and that I've shared with people since joining the team is just how people are accepted for, arriving where they are, using different routes and different ways of gaining knowledge. And not all of us are, hard science-based with masters or PhDs. And that worked for our lab. That gave us a greater reach and a greater a variety of perspectives to look at things. And I think people look at that, and the ones that we have spoke with see that as a benefit, and we're able to look at things with slightly different lenses. And there's a growing acceptance and move toward two-eyed seeing, or incorporating both Western and Indigenous knowledges and valuing them on an equal playing field, not, looking at Indigenous
hierarchy
knowledge as being something, that needs to be proven by Western science, but that it has a lot to add to our way of knowing. And I think my favorite example, one of our first meetings with Clint Jacobs, who's the manager of the Walpole Island Heritage Center, we were speaking about an invasive plant, Phragmites, and how it's a major concern to the community. It's really taken over a lot of important habitats, and everyone's dealing with it. Everyone along the Great Lakes is doing the same thing, managing it using chemical and mechanical means. And Clint stopped and said that they wanted to have a naming ceremony, and they thought that was a good first step, and to give that plant a name and to look at it and ask it why it was there, and to approach it from that viewpoint, like, what is that plant there to teach us? And I think by adding perspectives like that, then we can look at a problem that we've been trying to manage for years with this completely new lens. And I think our science will be made better for it. So hopefully people see and appreciate that. But
yeah, and as you can imagine, as an ecologist, that speaks to me, because that tells me everything about why is it there. Well, so I start thinking about, well, what is the flow regime? What species used to be there? What are interactions with, the invertebrate or fish communities or bird communities? And so I've learned so much from the Anishinaabe-Moan language about when you actually hear the name, that tells you a lot about its ecology. So, it is a very reciprocal relationship. And it informs a lot about, so doing, this Phragmites project, we could have easily gone and just like burned and cleared it all. But I think we're creating space for the community to help guide, like, what areas would we even, Phragmites might occur as we continue to understand its ecology. There's certain places that used to be important habitats for the community or species at risk. Maybe we need to, that's where we want to focus our energy. But again, it is creating the space to allow that knowledge to guide that project. And so it's a real privilege to be part of that. And I learn a lot from it. And I think this is exactly the kind of way we need to be pursuing restoration and conservation with people who know the land and, understand and want to be responsible for stewarding those landscapes. So I think that's a wonderful example. Katrina, thank you for sharing that.
Great. Well, this is very fascinating and inspiring stuff, and I really enjoyed this conversation. But that's actually not why we invited you on Teach Me About the Great Lakes this week. And the reason we actually invited you on Teach Me About the Great Lakes this week is to answer these two questions. And the first one is this. If you could choose to have a great donut for breakfast or a great sandwich for lunch, which would it be? And
this is the question that's going to break our relationship. I don't know.
All answers are acceptable.
Yeah, but some are more acceptable. So don't screw it up. Yeah.
I am 100%. Don't even need to question it. A sandwich person.
Sandwich, really? Yeah. All right. So what sandwich and where? If I'm in Windsor, I guess, right? If I'm in Windsor, where should I go get a sandwich?
I haven't explored Windsor's food as much as I would have liked.
Right. Pandemic.
Yeah. Most of the year has been, and you can still do takeouts, but I struggle with that because of, the styrofoam and everything. In Toronto, my favorite sandwich place was this grilled cheese place in Kensington Market. And you could get gourmet grilled cheese where they would oil the outside of the toast so that it was so crispy. And I usually like an apple or a pear in there, maybe a pesto. So
maybe a pesto.
I'm a sandwich person the whole way.
All right, Catherine, here we go. The moment of truth.
Donut all the way. And you need to go to... And I have the best donut place in Windsor is called Plant Joy. It's a vegan donut bakery. In the pandemic, they've still managed to keep open. You can pre-order your donuts. They are incredible. My youngest daughter really likes just the cinnamon sugar one. I think she's just like a, purist, just likes that. And I don't know, I think I like that. The glazed is great. The maple one is great. If you can have one of each, also great with a cup of coffee.
Yeah, I'm a one of each kind of guy, I'll be honest.
One of each hand. I'm easily, there's nothing like a weekend donut coffee. If you can have just with your favorite people on a really nice day, that would be great.
There you go.
Followed by sandwiches.
Followed by, these aren't usually...
Interesting that you followed it, though. Right. Interesting that you followed donut for sandwich.
The nice thing about having two guests is, the question is designed to be mutually exclusive, but different answers mean we're just going on a culinary tour of that part of Canada.
Yeah.
Okay, and the second is this. So we like to ask, what is one piece of life advice that you have for our listeners? It can be big or little, serious or silly, just something they can take home with them. This has already been a very inspirational interview, in my opinion, but let's just put the button on the button, the cap on the donut or whatever.
The butter on the outside of the grilled cheese.
That's right. The butter on the outside of the grilled cheese.
I'll just go back to grilled cheese quickly because a friend just taught me the greatest thing I've heard in a long time, but you melt a little bit of cheese on the outside of the grilled cheese.
To get the crispiness.
Not going to lie. That's a technique I employ. Here's
another
one.
With that.
All right, while we're in this, life advice might be out, but here's this, is a thin layer of Dijon mustard on the inside. Not too much. A thin layer.
That's a go-to.
See, I can get behind all of that.
Yeah.
My life advice, I'll just go with the whole reason that I'm on the show is Catherine asked me if I would join. And I was like, oh God, no, that is not my thing. And then I said, well, I told myself I would say yes to things that scare me this year. So this year was a yes year, and it's led to me doing things that I don't think I would have agreed to in the past. And they've all turned out fine. So,
well, it's very much arcane that you said yes to this. Hopefully, not in the end that scary thing. So.
No, and it never ends up being as scary as you make it out to be. So, I feel like that is the advice I'm going with this year.
I don't know that I can top either. Any of those stories. I think the life advice, I guess it's just find your thing. There's so many things we could be doing. I mean, I've been lecturing to undergraduate students who are living through the pandemic, and I have lots of little people around me that are, this is their normal. They don't know that there was ever a life that, this didn't exist. And they look to me and think like, what can we do? And I think the best thing we can do is just like find your purpose and find your thing. And that will attract the people that you want to work with and align with. Like the work that we've done, it feels like we've accomplished a lot, but it's gone by really fast. It's come together so well. And I think we've just been really clear about how we roll and what and we made room and space for all of the ways that you can live a good life. So I'm hoping that like we can all reconnect, and it's not by, following we can disagree on the donut versus sandwich question, but I think, in general, if people do their thing, find what it is that they love, we all need all of our best selves to deal with whatever comes. And I'm just really happy when I see the people that I work with and care about do amazing things. And it's been a pleasure to work with them.
Well, I can't find better advice than that. Dr. Catherine Fabria and Katrina Kishig, both of the Healthy Headwaters Labs at the University of Windsor. Thank you so much for coming on and teaching us all about the Great Lakes.
Miigwech.
Thank you. Chimigwech.
Well, that was really inspirational and a whole lot to think about. I am amazed by everything that they're doing in their lab to try to integrate Indigenous peoples, and it really gives you a good idea of what allyship is in this context.
Yeah, it was really fantastic. Katrina said, that the time and trust issue, that's what it takes. I found that really, really interesting. Being at a land-grant university at Purdue, you're also, we're also supposed to be trying to bring research and education together in a way that will actually help people and bring in perspectives of the people who are on the ground. But we are also bound by the timelines of the 2-year grant, and then you're out, right? So I think it would be really awesome if funding institutions such as even our own and other organizations to sort of start to get behind this idea that it's going to take a while to do it right, and it's important for us to do it right. So that's something that I found really, really cool.
No, that is really, really cool. Something I was interested in, and I didn't quite have time to get into it, but Catherine talked about how she uses like all of her overhead and fees and things like that to hire a lot of people to be a more active ally. And for those who aren't in academia, what that means is she's basically spending her own budget, money that she could use on other things to complete research or whatever, and using that instead and she's very passionate clearly about how it helps her research, but I thought that was really notable because that's a significant sacrifice potentially to make. Sacrifice might not be the right term, but that's a significant use of resources, I guess would be the way to put it.
Right. Yeah. I think it's not sacrifice. I think it's a different way of using resources, but, to benefit the work that you're doing. So,
yeah, no, I agree. And to do what's right. And so I thought that was a lot to think about, certainly.
Yeah. And I'm also extraordinarily proud of the place I graduated from. Go University of Windsor. I'm not always like a rah, rah. I really enjoyed my time there, but I'm super proud that they are supporting us.
Yeah, no kidding. Hey, what's their mascot? We can say go, what are they, the Bears? They're probably the Bears. Go Bears.
No, they're the Lancers.
What's a Lancer?
It's a person on top of a horse with a lance.
Oh, like a knight?
To be fair, I was there a while ago. Okay. But yeah, we'll link to.
I will link to a Lancer. Well, go Lancers. And anyway, I thought that was good. That was really inspiring. I'm thrilled to have them on. Well, Carolyn, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people go to find out more about Illinois Indiana Sea Grant and the work that we do?
They can go to IICgrant, SEAgrant.org, or they can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, YouTube, looking for IIC Grant or Illinois Indiana Sea Grant.
Maybe less Instagram. Do we have Instagram? We have an Instagram?
I believe so. It's almost the holidays in 2020.
That is. We might have an Instagram. I don't know.
Anyway, pretty sure we do.
Great. Well, follow us in all those places, and you can find out a lot about the work we do. And until then, everybody stay safe. It's the holiday season. Our next episode will be our first anniversary extravaganza. It might be a couple weeks.
What the heck?
Huh.
We've been doing this for a year.
Oh, yes. You sound so shocked, as if you haven't been planning the extravaganza behind the scenes for 2 weeks now.
Yes. That was very, very, very credible and real.
Yes.
All right.
Anyway, and I was totally, I played along very well. I wasn't confused and confounded by it. But it may be a couple weeks. We're having some issues getting certain things together. So it may be a few weeks before you hear us with the holidays and everything like that. But the next episode, first anniversary extravaganza. Thank you so much for listening. This has been a lot of fun. And we'll see you in a few weeks. And until then, keep grading those lakes. Cha.